Jack Marston, and where we see him in 1914 during the epilogue of the first game, is an entire conversation itself. I could make an entire video just on that alone, just discussing how the cycle of violence impacted him and led him to end up the way that he did. Well, here we are. A. Yes, I'm sitting down again. Mind your business. B. Place your bets on if my setup or angle or something will be different in the next video, because I just can't seem to stop changing everything, keeping you guys on your toes. But anyway, many months later and an entirely different setup, but I have not forgotten about Jack Marston. I fear I will never forget about Jack Marston, because Jack is just one of those characters that from the moment I first heard their story, they have stuck with me. His story is so heartbreaking, but yet at the same time, it is so much fun to analyze and discuss and pick apart. He is an incredibly compelling character in all facets of his story. Now, to be fair, I do get far too attached to characters far too easily, so yeah, I'm probably a bit biased here. I have spent an embarrassingly long amount of time analyzing fictional characters and the background stories of fictional characters, but my patheticness aside, I wanted to make a video about Jack. Multiple people requested it, so that's what I'm doing. Which is my segue to say that this video is going to be shorter than my other ones. I do apologize for that, and the format's gonna be a little different too. My script isn't as strict, and I'm going a little more off the cuff, if you will. My other videos were much more analysis based, but I always intend to open up a discussion with every video I make. Even my posts on TikTok, I want to invite some kind of discussion, and y'all have definitely indulged me. I really enjoy reading the comments that I get. I don't read all of them, but the ones I do see do open a lot of discussion and have made me aware of certain points of perspectives that I never even thought of before, which was kind of the entire point of me posting online in the first place. This video isn't going to be an analysis in the same way those ones were. I really want this to be more of an open discussion. I think the idea of how Jack ended up at 19 years old when we see him in 1914 is a pretty big deal, and I have my own thoughts, theories, headcanons, I guess you could call them, about Jack's character and what comes after and what his thoughts and feelings were, since we don't have very explicit knowledge of it, and I would love to hear what you guys think. But anyway, enough about video structure. Jack Marston is not only a pretty iconic character in the Red Dead series, but he's a very important one as well. While we can't say for absolute certainty that he's the only member of the Vanderlyn gang to survive to 1914, he is the only one that we directly follow to that time period. He is the only one we see experience 4 different time periods of this rapidly changing late 19th century. And as the youngest member of the gang, we get to witness the cause and effect of his childhood and all the death and danger that came with it, and how that directly impacted his development way more directly than any of our other protagonists. We literally get to see him grow up. We get to see how the environment he grew up in made him terrified of confrontation and even made him insecure about his averseness to violence. Perhaps most heartbreaking, we see this troubled kid who is so terrified of confrontation and violence end up alone in a world that had taken everything and everyone from him. That comes with so much grief and guilt that it's honestly hard to articulate properly. And I fear grief and guilt is a pretty good way to sum up Jack Marston. So much of that poor boy's life has been wrought with conflict. Everywhere he went, it just seemed to follow and plague him. And when that's all your life is, from the literal moment you're born, it's no wonder that that would inevitably shape him. Like I said though, I don't intend this to be an analysis of Jack's entire character, because I fear that video would be 10 hours long. And while I am not beyond that, that is not the goal for today, nor do I have the time. I really want to take at the environment and circumstances that Jack grew up in and that he was surrounded by, and how that shaped him into the man we see in 1914. Now, if you've already seen my video about fatherhood and Red Dead Redemption, then you might recognize a few of the talking points here, and that is simply because one of the biggest influences on Jack's life is his father. John's parenting, and the very prevalent lack thereof in the beginning, had a huge impact on Jack's development, and it starts with John's absence from Jack's life as a very young child. As the gang took measures to sort of collectively raise Jack because John wanted no part in it,
I ain't the one taking Jack on fishing trips.
No, you ain't.
that normalized the idea of very violent people taking care of him. He did not have a choice in being surrounded by violent people, or just people who were comfortable with being violent or being surrounded by violence. But being surrounded by that violence is undoubtedly going to have an effect on him. Now, I would not categorize Abigail as a violent woman in any means. She was surely capable of it, don't get me wrong, but I would say it was pretty obvious that she wasn't as comfortable with it as some of the other members of the gang were. But I actually think it's more important to point out that it was more commonly the men in Jack's life who were more comfortable with their own brutality. With John refusing to step up, that meant that other members of the gang, such as Arthur and Hosea, took strides to influence and raise and just generally spend time with Jack. Now, obviously, none of them were violent towards Jack, but it still normalizes the idea of violent people not only raising him, but directly influencing his development. Again, they may not have directly been violent towards him, but he still witnessed the way these men interacted with each other. And there are plenty of examples of the way the men in camp are so violent with each other, whether through their words or actual physical actions.
Get up, you useless sack of shit! Get up!
Fetch me something to eat.
And sometimes John himself took part in those.
Just like your mama did? Raise a real man like you?
So no, he was not getting beaten up or berated by the adults in camp, but he was witnessing them do it to each other. More often than not, it was the men. Hi, Editing Jay here. I had a thought while I was editing this because I know somebody is going to point out the fact that the women are also known to be kind of violent with each other, and I just want to say that I am not trying to say that the women are never violent with each other and they are absolute sweethearts who always get along. Absolutely not. I can show plenty of examples of the women fighting each other, and I will right here.
You're useless. You're worse than useless. You're a parasite.
I've been working. Look at me. You little... Damn you.
My point here is not to say that the women aren't violent and the men are. My point here is, I will go on to say, that all of the paternal and sort of masculine guides in Jack's life are always violent. Jack did not need to look towards the other women in camp for maternal figures because his mother was always present in his life. Abigail was always around. Abigail never tried to leave his life. Abigail was always present in Jack's life. John was not. Therefore, it makes sense that Jack would look towards the other men in camp for some kind of paternal guide, for someone to model himself after. Listen, I don't like perpetuating gender roles, but it is 1899. You know, we gotta think about what the time was like back then. All of the models of masculinity in his life were very violent people. Again, I'm not trying to say that the women are perfect and they never fight and the men are evil, unruly beasts who have to always get in fisticuffs with one another. My point is, all of the men who Jack probably would have looked towards for some kind of guide in a paternal and masculine way, the people that he would have modeled his masculinity after, all happened to be very violent people. Therefore, he would have internalized the idea that masculinity equaled violence. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, back to the video. All of the paternal guides and models of masculinity in his life were people who became very complacent in their own brutality. He's watching as men who call each other friends and brothers are really rude and really violent towards each other. Whether he fully understands it or not, he is 4 years old at this time, he is still being fed this idea that male friendships or real masculinity is expressed through violence. Oftentimes, a lot of the men in camp based their own masculinity and their own worth off of their capabilities for violence. Again, whether or not Jack was fully conscious of it, we do see the ways that he internalizes a lot of these very toxic ideas that he grew up around. It manifests in both ages 12 and 16 later on in the story. We see as Jack becomes increasingly more anxious, and a lot of that fear seems to be surrounded around the idea of conflict. I find Jack to be very placating in his relationship with John, and I think that's for a few reasons. It could very well be just because he doesn't want his father to leave. I think it's pretty clear that Jack has a fear of abandonment, especially towards his father, and I can understand him trying so hard to appease John in any way possible just to keep his father around and actually be a parent. Or this could simply be because Jack fears any type of conflict or confrontation. Now, I don't think Jack is scared of his father in any regard, and I certainly don't think he fears his father being violent towards him. We have no reason to believe that John is any kind of violent towards his family, especially once they start coming together as a family unit. But Jack knows what his father is capable of. He has always been aware of John's capability and capacity for violence, especially in the epilogue of the second game, in which we see John constantly getting himself stuck in conflicts and then constantly excusing it with this perceived notion of not having a choice.
I didn't have much of a choice. What choice did I have? What choice did I have? I ain't got no other choice.
When John himself feels as though he has no choice but to be violent and constantly struggle with the idea of living a normal life, Jack is going to absorb that, especially when it has been happening over and over and over for 12 years of his life, if not more. Jack, unfortunately, only ever knew his father to be a man who struggled with his violent tendencies, someone who struggled to live a normal, well-adjusted life. And Jack clearly holds some contempt with his father because of this. For all of the men in his life to constantly struggle with societal conformity, and alongside that have no problem with conflict, even conflict that goes so far as to end in some kind of violent outcome, it has made that entire lifestyle normal to him. It's no wonder he grew up to choose the path he did. I think a big theme present in really all three Red Dead games is the idea of cycles of violence in particular, and how living a life surrounded by violence can really shape a person's trajectory in life. Once you are put into that situation, whether by choice or not, and especially the younger you're introduced to it, it becomes so incredibly hard to leave it. And we see that with John himself, and even our other protagonist, Arthur. Their circumstances as young children led them to seek out sanctuary in the arms of very violent people, and that led them to believe this really pessimistic, misanthropic perspective on life, and unfortunately that's just because it was the only way to survive. And because they were introduced to it so young, it is so difficult to just up and leave it. John was only 12 when he was taken in by Dutch, and he claims to have only been 11 when he first took another life. And if there's anything worse than being introduced to that kind of lifestyle at a really young age, it's probably just being born into it, which his son was. And we see how both of them end up living these lifestyles that are fleeing from authorities and being ostracized from society. But another pretty big cyclical theme I want to bring up here is that of revenge. Obviously, with redemption in the title, there's this idea of change and consequence in these stories with these characters. But revenge is a pretty big topic that comes up, especially in the second game, in which revenge is touted as this idea that's pretty much pointless.
You always said revenge is a luxury we can't afford. I ain't in the revenge business, Dutch. You know, a friend of mine, he always says, revenge is a fool's game.
We don't need to take revenge. We hardly know the guy.
We need money, but revenge?
Killing in cold blood, revenge. We all do bad things, but he seems to enjoy it now.
It's looked down upon like something that's not worth your time. Now, the hypocrisy of that, because of who it comes from, is not lost on me, believe me. But that is its own conversation for a different time, not today. But there is certainly something to be said about how often that idea is spouted versus how consistently it is ignored. Take the ending of Red Dead 2's epilogue, for example. Despite Dutch's teachings and the pleas of his wife, John Marston makes the decision to go after Micah Bell 8 years after the game has dissolved. And this act of revenge essentially ignites the entire plot of the first game. There is absolutely an argument to be made that had John not gone after Micah, he very well could have lived a very long life with his family, and in turn could have spared Jack from the fate of also becoming an outlaw. But I bring this up to point out the glaring similarity between father and son. Now, I'm of the opinion that the Vanderlyn gang was destined to fall apart. That gang was not staying together to the end of time. They were never going to move to California. There was no Tahiti. But Micah certainly sped the process up. So John takes it upon himself to take out the man who he blames for his loss of his community. As many problems as John had with the gang, as much as he questioned Dutch in the end, that gang was still like family to him. That was his only support system for over a decade during some of the most formative years of his life. And we see the frustration that John has for Micah for the entire situation during during that final confrontation. Now again, compare this to Jack's final pursuit of Agent Ross in the epilogue of the first game. While there's certainly a much more expansive history simply because Ross was pursuing the Vanderlyn gang when Jack was still a toddler, the real point of contention is, of course, when Ross and his men storm Beecher's Hope with the goal of taking out John. Not only does Jack find his father in the aftermath, but he has to comfort his mother during their loss. His family, his entire community, has been taken from him, and like Abigail begs John to not risk his life over some grudge, Jack is told by both of his parents many times over to never live the life of an outlaw. And like John ignores his wife's pleas, Jack ignores all of the deterrence from his family and risks his life over a revenge crusade against Ross. As much difficulty as Jack and John had in their relationship, many disagreements and arguments as they had, as much frustration as Jack held for John, he was undeniably influenced by his father. The real question is whether or not Jack realized how much he mimicked his father. I think that most of us can agree that John would not have wanted Jack to go after Ross and avenge his death. And I think that's kind of a multifaceted idea in and of itself. But one of the few things that John ever really demanded of Jack was for him to never follow in his footsteps. And yet, we see Jack go after an ex-government agent in the end. You could argue that Jack was inspired by that lifestyle in a weird way. We do see how he's entertained by stories of the Wild West and these heroes and gunslingers that go out and do these crazy feats. But I find that kind of hard to believe simply because of how anxious and timid Jack is, how afraid he is of conflict specifically. You could certainly make an argument that Jack's love for his father trumped all of that fear, and that in his wish to avenge his father, he had to sort of become his father in a way. This is where I want to point out that a very big chunk of Jack's childhood was spent trying to impress his father, especially in his late teenage years. There are a lot of conversations between Jack and his father, especially in the first game, that really showcase this insecurity that Jack has, how inferior he feels, or that he feels like he's not enough for his father. I said it in my fatherhood video, I'll say it again here, the fact that Jack goes after a fucking grizzly bear just to impress his father is insane to me. Just so he could get some kind of like pat on the back from his father is just so... it's heartbreaking, really. That kid was so desperate for any kind of validation that it pushed him to the point of stupidity. He thought himself better off dead than a nuisance to his father. And I think it would be so ignorant to assume that that did not play any part in his crusade against Ross. He risked his life and fought for his own independence just to prove himself to his father. Risking his life in a duel against some government agent does not mean anything to him. Well, it means something to him, but you know what I mean. Jack did everything he could possibly imagine in order to keep his father present and active in his life. Even if it meant putting himself in these terrifying, life-threatening situations, even if it meant doing chores and busy work that he really didn't want to do. I have always had the impression that Jack would absolutely give up his sort of bookish lifestyle if it meant that he could guarantee John's presence in his life. So yeah. Of course Jack would risk his life avenging his father's death in a duel against the man that killed him. Duh. But I do want to point out, in John's defense, which I don't come to very often, he never asked Jack to prove his masculinity, and he certainly never asked him to do it in any kind of violent manner. In fact, I would say he often encouraged the opposite. But I will remind you of the unfortunate environment in which Jack grew up for most of his formative years. In that gang, violence was masculinity. Violence was power. Violence was how you established yourself and proved your worth. So when his own father, who he knew very well to struggle with his own violent tendencies and his violent past, is taken out in such a brutal fashion that it's almost cartoonishly evil, what is Jack going to take away from that? That he should be the bigger person? That he should forgive and forget? Maybe have a calm conversation and discuss how his feelings were hurt? Hell no. While I always thought that his decision to wait until he was 19 simply came from the desire to spare Abigail from seeing the lifestyle he had chose, Jack was always going to retaliate in a violent manner. There was no other option than going after Ross. All he has ever grown up with is this eye for an eye mentality. Ross's life in exchange for his father's just makes sense. I could certainly also see this idea of fighting for his family's name, you know, kind of fighting for this idea that the Marstons can't die or won't die, or they won't be put down that easily. Sort of like carrying on a legacy. And I could certainly see how the love he had for his parents overshadowed any kind of fear he might have had over living this outlaw lifestyle and risking his life. But that is the question. If it goes against his parents' wishes, is it still respecting them? Even if he is avenging his father, is it still a righteous act if it goes explicitly against what his father wanted? That is where I start to wonder if this entire ordeal is just for Jack's own satisfaction. And I don't say that he didn't want to avenge his father, he absolutely did, that's the entire point. But again, if that's something his father never wanted, could he argue that he did avenge his father? Or is this entire thing just a way for him to prove to himself that he grew into a capable adult? Is this just a way for him to prove that masculinity that he tried so hard to prove his entire life? The gratification and approval from his parents don't mean anything anymore. Going after Ross isn't for anyone but himself. It isn't to prove anything to anyone but himself. Now, this is certainly where we get into kind of headcanon territory, but I am very strongly of the opinion that after the entire ordeal, I do not see Jack living for much longer, whether by his own hand or someone else's. I think he would intentionally not go on for much longer, if you catch my drift. Sorry, I have to censor myself. And I only say that because he goes about the entire crusade against Ross, honestly kind of stupidly. He leaves 2 witnesses who see his entire face, hear his voice, hear his plan to go find Ross and deliver a message. Yeah, man, they're gonna find you, especially if you're staying in the West Elizabeth area. If he really wanted to go about this sneakily and take out Ross in a way that nobody could ever find him, he absolutely could have. But that's not what he did. Whether or not he wanted to get caught, I don't really know if that's the case, but it's almost like he didn't care. I always thought he never really put that much thought into it. It didn't matter how he went about it. The end goal was the same, and that was all that mattered.
I've come for you, Ross.
So long as Ross died, nothing else mattered. It didn't matter if he got arrested. It didn't matter if he got caught. It didn't even matter if there were witnesses. When you put your mind to something that big, when you get so anxious and work yourself up over it, when you dedicate years of your life to it, when it finally happens and you have the big moment, it is very satisfying. I'm sure Jack felt amazing in the moment, and it felt like all of those years and all of that wrongdoing lifted off of his shoulders. I mean, I know it felt really satisfying and I was just playing a video game. But once you actually do it, what comes next? What do you do afterwards? Obviously, in the literal sense, we just get to go back into the open world and we can dick around and do whatever we want. But if we take this story far too literally and we imagine what Jack actually would have done with his life afterwards, what point is there? He's not running Beecher's Hope, we see that plenty well enough. Again, if he's staying in the West Elizabeth area, I think there's a pretty good case that he's getting found out. It makes me think that there was no long-term plan. The goal was to get Ross, take him out, and Jack hadn't really thought that far afterwards. He fixated so much on the idea of taking Ross out that he never pictured anything past it. That became the entire goal, that became the entire purpose. He doesn't have a family, he doesn't have anybody to go back to. Jack is such an angry man in 1914, and at such a young age that's so unfortunate. It really does make me feel for him. And again, that's why I've always interpreted him as somebody who wouldn't really go on much longer. I don't want the kid to do that, but that's just kind of how I interpreted the entire thing, given how he handles the entire act of taking Ross out. Obviously, that's all headcanon and speculation, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. With all of that in mind, that is to say that Jack does bear some responsibility here. You always have a choice. You always have the ability to make something more than what your circumstances gave you. But also, that can be so incredibly fucking hard. It can be impossible at times. At the very least, so difficult it feels impossible. Especially when you are literally born into it and it is all you have ever known. I'm not going to sit here and say that Jack had absolutely no choice but to become an outlaw, but I am going to say that I completely understand why he became one. I do not blame him at all for resorting to the path that he took, and I don't think any of us do. Jack is such an interesting character. I find him so fascinating. His entire story, the fact that he's one of the few people we get to see the entire timeline from child to adult, is so intriguing to me. He is such a heartbreaking character, and I definitely think about him a lot. I'm sure this will not be the only video I make on him, but that idea specifically of how his environment shaped him was just really intriguing to me. Y'all asked for a video on Jack, and I'm more than happy to oblige. Again, I do apologize for this video being way shorter than my other ones and the format being different. I haven't had a lot of time to script and record. I try to shoot for one video a month. Unfortunately, June has just been beating my ass. It has been so busy. I hope June's been better for you guys though. Happy Pride Month! I haven't said that yet. Happy Pride Month! I hope y'all had a good Pride Month, gay or not. Pride doesn't end in June, but I still hope everybody had a good time. But while I'm here, I just want to extend another thanks to everybody who's been watching and supporting. I cannot believe that my last video, I think as of recording this, is sitting at 15,000 views. Oh my god. Holy shit. I literally can't even fathom that. I'm at, I think, 1,200 subscribers as of recording this. That's also fucking insane. I cannot thank you guys enough. Yeah. Every single one of you counts to me, so thank you. If you do have any suggestions for things you want me to talk about, by all means, feel free to leave them in the comments. Yeah, it's late. This is my second time recording this because my software shit the bed the first time, so I'm tired. I think that's all I really got. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and I guess I will see you when I see you next. Bye-bye!